Welcome back to the container gardening tutorial. I'm Rob Sproul, and now we're going to talk about containers. The amount of containers you can choose from, the selection of containers, is almost as wide as the plants itself. So how do you choose the best container for you? When planning your container garden, it's important to think about, when you think about your container, what kind of style are you looking for? These whiskey barrels are very cool. They're in about 4 different colors. That's a more traditional style. If you're planting a container that you think would look great at the cottage, or just kind of a nice summer container with traditional stuff, that's a good one for you. The wood stays cool and it keeps it a little bit more moist. Now moving down a bit, if you're looking for something a little more interesting, we have deco containers, ceramic containers. These are the traditional heavy containers that, and they come in, as you can see, they come in a ton of different colors. Just a ton of them. They're all hand painted, and they just go on forever. The variety's endless with these. Deco containers, on the inside is, it is a clay on the inside. Now deco containers are great. They're a little more expensive than some of the others, and you want to bring them in the winter, because this glaze, if the water gets on this glaze, it can get in there and crack the glaze, but they look stunning. Over here, these are what we call the big pots, and this is by a company called Crescent, and they make big pots, but they're really quite lightweight. And this is if you're planting a really big container. I'm talking really big. If you want to start using the really big annuals, if you want to start planting cedars in there and other really big stuff and really make an impact, go for the Crescent containers. Of course, the resin is not limited to the big ones. This is a wonderful container for planting because it's fairly shallow and it tapers down. These big guys, if you plant in this container, you're going to want to fill about half of it with filler, rock or mulch, styrofoam, wood chips, what have you, because if you fill it with soil, first of all, soil's more expensive than rock is going to be, and secondly, the roots are not going to get down that far in the season anyway. And so the water's just going to leach down, it's just going to stay wet, and the wet soil at the bottom of the roots is not going to do the plant any favors, because the soil that stays wet, the plant will take up all the oxygen and it'll drown just like we will. So if you're planting in a container any deeper than about this, so for example some of these, fill the bottom half or so with some filler that will really add in the drainage. When you're planting a container, always make sure that you have sufficient drainage on the bottom. There are some containers that don't have sufficient drainage, so you don't want to plant directly into them. Moving on a bit, so we have, the resin has become very popular. We have tons of different kinds of resin. We have things like this. They don't have drainage. These are actually for water gardens. Kind of a neat thing. We have some decorative planters here. In the past few years, zinc has become very popular. This is a zinc planter, very neat, very lightweight, very sleek looking. If you're thinking about doing a container garden that's very modern, if your yard has real contemporary tones to it, this is probably the thing for you. Keep in mind that this doesn't have drainage on the bottom, and zinc exposed, the zinc is treated, but zinc exposed to continual water will rust out after a while. So what I always recommend to do with zinc, the pot looks fabulous, but build up with bricks or something from the pot, and then just plant a cheap container like a fiber container and put it in there. Every once in a while you might want to take out the fiber container, dump the pot, dump the water out, but just put a cheap container in there. That way your pot stays intact, your pot stays really healthy, it doesn't stay dirty, and you can just keep kind of turning that container over through the seasons. Terracotta containers aren't as popular in Canada as they are in Europe. Whenever I tour garden centers in Britain or France, terracotta is huge. Not as popular here, but terracotta, because it tends to suck the moisture out of the roots and it tends to absorb moisture. That's why you see the terracotta, the moss. Moss tends to grow on it. Not a great idea for our dry climate. In England, where anything will grow, it's not such a bad thing. And the pots don't have to be expensive. Like this is a nice deco pot, it's $19. It's a good solid pot, it'll last for years and years. And of course, you can move into the, this is a plastic pot from Elho, which is one of the most famous, which is one of the most popular pottery companies or pot companies in Europe. It has drainage, it's good to plant into, and it comes in, they're really known for their bright, bright colors. This is quite zany, this one. And remember, lastly, pots or pot covers. These two here, they're beautiful, but they're not pots. They have no drainage. They're pot covers. So the idea with this one, for example, is if you get a Gerber daisy or a nice house plant, to put that in there and then take it out. You might have to drain it, but you don't plant directly into there because it's called a pot cover. It's really an accessorizing for pots. So that's a little bit about pottery and choosing your container. The theme of the container should reflect the theme of the planter. If you choose a really tall container like this, try to make sure, you should make sure that your planter, the plants you put in, are also tall, so it doesn't look out of proportion. If you choose a really tall container and you have very, very short 6-inch plants, then the container is going to look out of proportion, and when people look at it, all they're going to see is container. With a container this tall also, good idea to have more trailing plants. You always want to keep your proportion. The proportion in nature is the essence of beauty. That's a little bit about containers for your container gardening.